Imagine that this home that you see on the screen right now is yours, and that your family has been in this home, living in it for generations. Now imagine that one day, a man comes up to your home with a group of other armed men and demands that you leave the house immediately. If you don't leave, he'll harm you, and if you try to fight back, he'll harm your family too. Now I want you to think deeply about this while I talk through the rest of it, and I'll come back to it at the end. So I have to talk about the history of the land before I actually talk about the main topic, which is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the rights of Palestinians. So some early history is that Palestine has been controlled by many groups of people, so anywhere from the Assyrians to the Romans to the Crusaders and then the Ottomans who ruled it for 400 years. And it was long inhabited by Christians, Muslims, and Jews, and they lived peacefully together. So World War I marks an important point in Palestine's history. The Balfour Declaration in 1917 was written by the British, and they promised European Jews a homeland in the territory of Palestine. The British actually controlled Palestine as a mandate province from 1917 to 1948, and during these years they allowed mass migration of European Zionists into Palestine and allowed them to have paramilitary groups. They didn't ask for Palestinian consent to establish a state within their lands. The Zionist movement was actually founded by Theodor Herzl in 1897, and this was a nationalist movement to push for a Jewish homeland. As a result of this, many began to enter Palestine. In World War II, an event known as the Holocaust occurred, which was the horrific killing of 6 million Jews and a mass genocide by Nazi Germany. After World War II ended, there was a strong push to establish a homeland, and many were sympathetic with the Jewish peoples and wanted them to have this ethnic homeland. While this may seem like a very positive thing, it would require assigning land of people, and these people had been living on this land for thousands of years, generation after generation. So now on to the partitioning of Palestine. So what should have happened was that there was a 1947 plan put by the United Nations to create both a Jewish state for the Israeli Zionists and a Palestinian Arab state. And then Jerusalem would be an international territory for all to enjoy. But what actually happened was that this plan was rejected, and then in 1948, the Jewish state of Israel was established instead, and Palestinians were expelled from their lands. Now, an era of violence. Although there are so many examples that I can give during this period, I'm going to talk about some of the most important ones that shape the history to come. First, starting with the Deir Yassin massacre. On April 9th, 1948, which actually the anniversary was 2 days ago, Zionist paramilitary groups, the Ergun and Lehi, attacked the village of 600 people. More than 200 were killed in unfathomable ways, but I'm going to spare you the gory details. The village was completely destroyed, and this was used as a tactic by Zionist terrorist groups who were recognized as such by the British government to scare off Palestinians from their lands and make it way easier to control. Then, on May 15, 1948, a Nakba, or the catastrophe, was marked by the expulsion of approximately 700,000 Palestinians from their homes and a massive ethnic cleansing. There was a destruction of over 600 villages, and this means complete destruction, so none of these villages are seen on maps now. And as a result of this, there was an establishment of Israel in 1948. Later on, the Six-Day War of 1967 resulted in Israeli occupation of the West Bank, including the Old City of East Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip, Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, and Golan Heights from Syria. Shortly afterwards, East Jerusalem was annexed by Israel. More recently was the 2014 siege of Gaza, in which thousands of people were killed in air raids by the Israeli army. Gaza was completely blocked off. Over 1.8 million people were left without any resources, and parts of Gaza were completely obliterated. Most of the death toll was children. Now onto an inhibition of rights that continue to this day. Israel denies its human rights obligations towards Palestinians, and it has facilitated the transfer of its civilians to the occupied West Bank, and this is in violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention and Israeli law itself. And economically, Israel has imposed full control on Palestinian trade and does not allow the Palestinians to reap the full benefits of their trade. So now on to why Palestinian rights are long overdue. There are so many reasons, but these are the main points. Palestinians are people who deserve freedom, dignity, and prosperous lives. The United Nations itself has declared the right of return for Palestinians, the end of settlements, the security that Israel has to provide, and many other things. Thousands have been killed and continue to be killed on both sides of this conflict, and the violence needs to end. Gazans have been completely blocked off and cannot get basic supplies to this day, including food, water, and electricity for hospitals even. Israel's frequent air raids on Palestinian cities have resulted in the death of many, and there has been a wiping out of a rich history from the world. The occupation of land has also been considered an awful tactic in the world, and the violation of human rights that they sign is an obvious red flag. There have been illegal actions such as the settlements that I mentioned earlier, which again are illegal by Israeli law itself. And there has been blocking off of aid to Palestinians. A few years ago, the United Nations attempted to bring in food and other resources vital to the Palestinians, but Israel completely blocked them off and didn't allow them to. And actually recently, over the past 10 days, peaceful protests for the right of return in Gaza have resulted in Israeli snipers killing 31 peaceful demonstrators, including a journalist who was wearing a press vest, which is illegal in itself. This picture right here shows the progression of the loss of land in Palestine. The first picture to the very far, which is all yellow, shows 1917, the map of Palestine, which is before the creation of Israel. Next picture is 1946, which is when lots of mass migration into Palestine began to occur. And then the next picture is the United Nations Partition Plan of 1947, which was rejected, and the result is the 1948 to 1949 next picture, which is when Israel was formed. And then 1967 during the Six-Day War, and then present. This is how much land has been lost to Israel, and Palestinians used to live on this land and cherish it, but now none of them have it. And the little yellow spots that remain today are still being occupied as well. So what about that scenario I mentioned earlier? Well, now think of it this way. This was an attack on your home. Your house was getting invaded by someone, an outsider, someone that tried to take it away and harm you and your family. By force. That's exactly how the Palestinians have felt. Thank you.